touch and reach you with heart and soul. My Lord.
Well, good morning. Good morning. Get myself centered here. Well, good morning on this wonderful tropical day in Austin, Texas. Some of you didn't have to read the memo. It's pretty obvious. It's turned summer again, hasn't it? It's wonderful. I love it. I love it. I love it. So I took the plaids off and went back to the Hawaiians, you know. I'll probably need the plaids later, but it's kind of nice having the Hawaiians this morning. All right, well, we've been doing I think a wonderful awareness study, a study of spiritual principles stimulated by and based upon the understandings and ideas of the 7 days of creation, coming from a wonderful work by Eric Butterworth, The Creative Life. And we're in the process of releasing our inner creative genius, aren't we? So I want you to look around the person next to you and say, you are a creative genius. You are a creative genius. Now take a deep breath and just take that in and just say to yourself, well, you know, that's true. I really am. We are in that process all the time, aren't we? And that's part of what we're really waking up to. And that's one of the things that they talk about in the very first day of creation, let there be light, is a waking up to this knowing. It's an awareness that we're in that process of creation. And that's a wonderful, powerful, empowering knowing that we are in that process of being a creative genius and that we are participating in that in all ways in our lives. And the second day of creation, of course, was about, we talked about it metaphysically being about faith. It's having a faith in what we want and intend, and having faith that it already is so now. It's a knowing quality of heart and mind. It's a way of really tuning into an assurance of things hoped for and the evidence of things unseen. And today we're going to take that a little further and talk about that third step, or the third key, or the third day in creation that Eric talks about. So let me read to you from Genesis chapter 1, verse 9. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." And it was so. And God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. So today we're going to talk about the dry land. We're going to talk about this understanding of the dry land being separated from the waters. And so metaphysically, I want to read to you actually one of the things that Eric says about this. I think is really his words I think are very valuable. Page 50. Here we go. So on the third day of creation, when the account reads, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together in one place, and let the dry land appear," what you need to understand is that the dry land is the mental image of formed thoughts, the ability to see what can be as opposed to what is. And the power to see what might be is one of the chief traits of the creative genius. The ability to see what can be. So we're really talking here about what Charles Fillmore calls our divine power of imagination, aren't we? It's the ability to see beyond the appearances and see what the possibilities are. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that and explore that awareness and see how we are in the process of practicing that in our daily life. I came across a story about a golfer that was playing really badly and not doing very well. And so I actually went to see a psychiatrist to see what was going on, because it was just really kind of bothering him. So the psychiatrist told him, he said, well, you just need to relax. Here's what I suggest to you. Go out and play golf And don't use a ball, just use your imagination. And just imagine yourself seeing yourself hitting and playing the most wonderful game. And so the golfer thought, well, that sounds kind of crazy, but I'll give it a try. So he went out and he was playing golf, and he was imagining he had a ball and he was teeing off and just seeing these beautiful shots, just wonderful shots. And as he's going along, he noticed that another golfer was doing the same thing. And so they kind of talked a little bit, and apparently they went to the same psychiatrist. And they were doing the same thing. And so they said, well, let's just go ahead and play around together then. So so they're actually teeing off, and they're playing these wonderful, marvelous games, and they get down to the last hole. And this one guy tees off, and he swung at the imaginary ball, and he announced, man, look at that. Man, it's gone 280 yards right down to the middle of the fairway. And then the second golfer came along and matched his drive, and he said, well, look at that. Look at that shot. It went right over the pin and reversed and rolled right back into the hole. I won. And the other guy said, no, you didn't. You hit my ball. I actually had a friend. I have a friend. I haven't seen him in a little while, but a wonderful guy who used to actually do this. He used to teach golfers who had kind of lost. They'd kind of lost the fun of the sport of golf. They got so intent on their score and so caught up in the importance of making the right shot that they really kind of lost the fun of the game. And so he used to take them out on one of the most amazing golf courses up on top of Swananoa Mountains over in Ashton, Virginia. It's a beautiful golf course that sits on top of the Blue Ridge Mountain. And there's a 360-degree visibility everywhere you look around this golf course. It's just stunning. And he used to take them out there and teach them how to play Zen golf. And basically it's playing golf without a ball. And imagining them teeing off and seeing this wonderful game, and they found that not only did they learn to love the game again, but their game actually became much better. Their scores even became better because they forgot about the scores and just enjoyed the experience of the game. And so they used their imagination to see what the possibilities were and see the enjoyment of it. I think that's really a valuable awareness. So we talk a lot about the understanding and the power of the mind in unity. And there is a great power in our mind, and it's important for us to pay attention and notice that we are using that in how we are using it. Albert Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. Imagination is more important than knowledge. And as I think about this, it's important because we are in that process of using our imaginations to create circumstances and situations, and in all honesty, we are using our imaginations to create, I'm going to say it this way, but I'm going to kind of rephrase it. We're actually using our imaginations to create ourselves. And I'm going to suggest to you that that statement is only partially true. Because the reality is we are not creating ourself, we are creating a greater expression of our true self. Or we're creating a limited expression of our true self. Aren't we? Our self has already been created. Our self was created in the image and after the likeness of the divine. Our true nature, our true being was created as an expression of that divine spark of creation. And that it already is, and it already is whole, and it already is complete, and it already is magnificent. And we are in the process of creating expressions of varying degrees of that magnificent self that we are. Does that make sense? It's a beautiful way of understanding that really the reality is that we are participating in expression, and that's what creativity really is about. It's really allowing that imprisoned splendor to be released, to be unfolded. Eric talks about it this way. He says, This is the third step in the creative process. Then the creative creation of dry land from the surrounding waters deals with the imaging from the inside out, what can be called the I-amaging process. I-amaging. I love that. I-am-aging. And it is not about imaging superficial things and experiences that we perceive with our senses. Instead, it is the I-amaging, releasing all that we are from within ourselves. And this kind of imaging is very creative. It is seeing the dry land while the waters are still gathered together. Metaphysically, the waters represent that potential and the possibilities of life, and the dry land is a forming of those out into something that is more solid in our experiences. He goes on to say, you're not seeing an image, you see from an I-image. It is something new, something creative, something that is yours and something that is you. I love that awareness, and I think it really helps us to shift our understanding and talk a little bit about the creative process in a way that allows us to understand that we are participating as, I guess the best way to describe it that really speaks to me is that your life is art. It is your art. And you are in the process of creating in a way that is artistic, whether you know it or not. Yesterday, Julie and I had the wonderful opportunity to go and see do the East Austin studio tours, which is actually, I thought it was actually, when I read it, I thought it was musical studios, but it's actually artist studios. And it's a magnificent thing. If you've not gone to it, I really highly recommend it. It's quite beautiful, and some of the art is just amazing. Some of it's just wonderful. Some of it is very, very primitive, and some of it is very advanced. And it really, either way, is still an expression of that artist's ability and idea of creativity and how they are using that in their life, and to put something out here that is really coming from within them. And I'm going to suggest to you that you and I are doing that also. We're doing that not necessarily on canvas, we're not doing it necessarily in clay, but we have a medium of expression. And our life is that medium of expression. And we are painting all kinds of wonderful swaths of different colors all the time, aren't we? Mr. Jacob was there, he remembered, you know, don't you? Jacob did a good job helping us visualize and see things, and it was a great experience. So I think about that, and I really have enjoyed and appreciated that analogy, that awareness that you are the artist of your life. And so it's important for us to notice and pay attention to the process that we're going through as we experience that creative energy. Thomas Troward, who was a British educator and philosopher, said, having seen and felt the end, you have willed the means to the realization of the end. I'm going to read that again because it's interesting wording, but it's really very beautiful understanding and awareness. Having seen and felt the end, you have willed the means to the realization of the end. Does that make sense? So I love that awareness, and what he's saying is, having seen and felt what is possible, what your desire is, what it is that you want to see and experience in your life, you have actually, in that very process of seeing it, brought into being, or your experience, the means, the ways for that end to come about. Now, you may not know what that is in the moment. You may not know the means. You may not even be able to see the means at that point. But the means are there. And it's the very act of seeing the possibility that brings into your energy field, you might say, the ability to take the next step and take those steps that are necessary to get to that end. In pre-imaging, Milton Lomas wrote this. He said, pre-imaging, Leonardo da Vinci wrote in one of his many notebooks, is the imaging of things that are to be. So the story of Leonardo as an inventor is a story of history's greatest imagining things that came into existence after his time. 4 centuries before the American bicycle maker Wilbur and Orville Wright put an airplane in the air, Leonardo was attempting to create one in his workshop. 4.5 centuries before the Russian-born American engineer Igor Sikorsky instructed a helicopter suitable for human travel, Leonardo was developing one that could be carried aloft by an aerial screw similar to the mechanism devised by ancient Chinese toy makers that made spinning tops. So he was already envisioning things that were that at the time there was no possibility, and yet some centuries later someone also had the same imaging and was able to create the helicopter. Things that are imagined are things that eventually come into being. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. I love that saying that says today's science fiction is tomorrow's science fact. We have seen that in our lifetime so many times, haven't we? Yeah. Beam me up, Scotty. I have to be careful. So I think it's valuable for us to look at and notice our own usage of the gift and the faculty of imagination. I think this is a great opportunity to look at and notice how we are focusing our gift of imagination and what we're using it for and how we are using it. Are you aware that, that everything that you remember right now is imagination? I'm not saying things didn't happen and didn't exist, but what you experience of them right now is only an imagination. Now, be careful with that word only, imagination, but it's important to recognize that it is imagination. We're not seeing what actually happened, we're not experiencing what happened, but we are imagining something that happened, even though it actually perhaps happened. It's happening now basically as an imagination of our experience of it. Does that make sense? So it's important for us to recognize that our past is not necessarily the truth. It's really valuable to recognize that we sometimes find ourselves using our imagination, getting caught up in all of the images of our past, and thinking that is who we are, and thinking that's determining who we can be. I came across this saying from Mark Twain. When I was younger, I could remember anything, whether it happened or not. And then this is an anonymous quote. It says, if you live your life out of your memory, you live out of your history. That's what once was. If you live out of your imagination, you live out of your potential. And that's what can be. So, as I was reflecting this week, it's interesting, actually it wasn't this week, it was last week, and even before I began preparing for my lesson for this week, but last week I got this message in my meditation. It said, never let your experience determine or limit your possibility. Never let your experience determine or limit your possibility. What's happened in the past really does not have any control or bearing on what's possible for us, what's possible in us, what's possible for us to move into in our experiences in life. I had this great story that I came onto in a little magazine called Bits and Pieces. You guys familiar with that little magazine? Very positive, great stories. Some of you may not be aware of this artist. Some may. His name is Liu Chi-king. He placed second to Van Cliburn in the 1958 Tchaikovsky competition and was very shortly after imprisoned, a year later, he says, through the Cultural Revolution in China. And during the entire 7 years he was held, he was denied the use of a piano. But soon after his release, however, he was back on tour. And critics wrote astonishment that this musician was better than ever before. How did you do this? one critic asked him, he said, "You had no chance to practice for 7 years." And he said, "I did practice. Every day, I rehearsed every piece I had ever played, note by note, in my mind." He actually improved his playing over that time without ever touching a piano. It's absolutely amazing and phenomenal what the power of our imagination can do in our lives. Richard and Mary Alice Dufolo talk about through the study of psychoneuroimmunology. Are you guys familiar with that? It's a big word, but it really talks about the understanding of how our minds and our way we think affects our physical being. He says it has been documented that strong thoughts and emotions metamorphose directly into hormones and chemicals in the body. These chemicals directly influence our health. Thoughts and emotions determine not only our physical health, they establish our total life experience, and we can use our thoughts and make things in our lives. I came across another study that I thought was really fascinating. They hooked up some sensors in between the toes of some clients and some patients, and what they did was they asked them to imagine that they're warming their feet in front of a fire. And they noted that the temperature on these gauges went up as they began to imagine. It is so obvious that our imagination, our thoughts, affect our physical being. It's so easy to demonstrate that in so many ways. There was another wonderful study about mirrors, using mirrors, and in a British University of Bath in England, they found that they could have people stand in front of mirrors that had been, who had limbs that had been injured. And they had fixed the mirrors in such a way that the limbs appeared whole and healthy. And what they discovered, that it diminished their pain to almost nothing as they began to stand in front of the mirror and see themselves already in that mirror as being whole and healthy. It began to bring down their pain symptoms without pain medication, which I thought was pretty fascinating. So the mind has this ability, of course, to create endorphins and create those things that are necessary to heal based upon how we use it. So I want to think about this idea of our possibility. What is your creative possibility? What is our creative possibility? Emerson said that you are an inlet that may become an outlet to all there is in God. I love that quote. You are an inlet that may become an outlet to all there is in God. You have within you this amazing divine possibility. And Eric goes on to say, you are an eachness within the allness. You are an I am in expression as you. And so one of the things that Eric talks about in this work that I think he talks about, it's important for us to not use our imagination just simply as a way of he calls it a gross materialization of simply manifesting parking spaces and manifesting stuff in our lives. But you can. And here's the thing, here's where I have a little differ from Eric on this. I think it's actually a valuable exercise to try and manifest parking spaces. I think it's a valuable exercise to manifest those things in your life that you would like to experience and have. I think it's a very valuable, and I think it's actually a part of our learning process. But I do agree with him that if we stop there, we have really missed the whole possibility and what I think the real potential for using our imagination is. So it's not so much about, it's fine and it's valuable, and I think it's not to mention it's fun, manifesting stuff. Manifesting stuff is actually a fun exercise, and one of the things it does is it gives us a feedback that we're in that process of manifesting. And it's a great exercise. It's a great way of learning and growing. So I don't diminish that understanding, and I think it is a step that we go through in understanding our creative process. But if we only limit ourselves in that way, we're not really living our possibilities, are we? So really, we're talking about the I image is really our self-image, our self-I-image. How are we bringing forth the expression of our greater possibility as a being, as a creative possibility, as a creative being in life? And how are we using our imagination to see who and what we are, and how we are expressing those unique divine qualities that are possible for us in life? Charles Fillmore talked about the 12 powers that we all have within us. How are we using our imagination to see ourselves as being someone who has and is an expression of wisdom? How are we using our imagination to visualize and see ourselves as someone who has faith? You follow me? How are we using that gift of imagination, which is actually one of the 12 powers, isn't it? Of being someone who has and is imaginative. Sometimes we don't think we are very creative. I've had people say, well, I'm really not a very creative person. Well, I don't agree with that. You just created that experience for yourself of not being creative. So it's valuable for us to recognize that the way we see things, Robert McGarvey says, don't fret if your mental images aren't clear. People think in different ways. David Thornburn explains, words, taste, musical notes, the key is to use whatever works for you. As your comfort with imaging increases, involve more of your senses. If you can see, hear, touch, smell, taste your goal, the results will be that much better. And so part of what we're doing is using all of our different faculties to imagine and see not just greater having in life, although there's value in that, but greater being in life, a greater expression of our true nature. And so one of the things Eric teaches us also is that one of the most impressive misuses of the application of imagination and the imagination of the power of the mind is worry. Anybody ever done that? We do. We're good at that, aren't we? We have a good, we had practice perhaps, He goes on to say, worry is one of the most effective illustrations of the warping of prayers. James Russell Lowell says, let us be of good cheer, remembering that the misfortunes hardest to bear are those that never come. Yeah. And imagination, I love this one. He says, imagination is something that sits up and keeps mom and dad company the first time their teenager stays out late. So, John Culhane is a writer, an amazing writer, and is a historian of the life of Walt Disney. He was also the author of Fantasia. You guys familiar with Fantasia? Love that work. Talk about imagination. He says, the way to make things work is not to worry, Walt Disney told me, and to get interested in some little idea that looks like fun. And like imagining what Peter Pan would see as he flies over London. Can you see it? Yeah. With those eloquent hands, voice, eyes, and brow, Walt Disney made me see Peter Pan, the children flying high above the winding Thames River, the lamps of carriages glowing in the streets far below. Peter and the kids might even perch for a moment on the hands of Big Ben. And Walt told me just before heading for Neverland, second star to the right, straight on till morning, and I was mesmerized. You could see it, can't you? It's a beautiful way of working with our imagination, especially when we find ourselves moving into a place where we're visualizing, imagining something that we really don't want to see and experience in our world. Emmett Fox called this the golden key. How many of you are familiar with that one? It's a great classic work. He says the essence of the golden key is when you are faced with a problem, when you're dealing with a problem, stop thinking about the problem and think about God instead. Think about love. Think about peace. Think about joy. Let me share with you one of the things that I think I've shared this with the group before. I don't know, but when I was growing up, I was in high school, I used to have migraine headaches. And I had them pretty severely at times. I actually passed out a couple of times from having migraine headaches different times, and I didn't have a clue what was going on. So I wound up going to this wonderful old country doctor, small town doctor, Dr. Sam, and went to see Dr. Sam, and I told him what was going on and explained what was happening to me. And he said, well, it sounds to me like you're having migraine headaches. And I went, oh, okay. Well, I said, well, what do I do about that? And he said, well, certainly you can take something for it, but just, try to relax. And he said, do you find yourself worrying? And of course, in high school, I worried. I worried about everything. I worried about whether people liked me or didn't like me. I worried about what I was wearing. Anybody know these? Yeah. So typical high school kind of things, but I worried a lot. I was focused a lot on stuff that I really was fearful about. And he says, well, what I suggest that you do is when you find yourself worrying, just imagine yourself maybe walking along a nice beach and feeling just, visualize and see yourself feeling relaxed. And I started doing that, and I didn't have migraine headaches. I got rid of my migraine headaches. I didn't have any more passing out experiences. And it was one of my first, probably, introductions to the importance of what you see in life and how you visualize and what you see. And so when I thought about that, I realized that I was actually changing my physical being by the very act of how I was seeing life. I was using the golden key. I was not focusing on those things that I didn't want. I was focusing on something pleasant and loving and beautiful, and it works. I had a great lesson this last week on how we can do that. Anybody here ever use Netflix? So I'm not trying to advertise, but we use Netflix, and they have a new, I don't know if it's new or not, but it's new to me. They have a new preference settings on Netflix. Now Netflix has a myriad of different movies. I mean, there's some amazing, the amount of movies they have is pretty phenomenal. And as I was going through the list, it was a checklist of things that I would prefer in movies and things that I did not prefer. And what I found is that I really don't like horror movies, and so I just said no, never. Right. And I really like movies that really inspire my imagination, and that's what I check for often. And then occasionally I like actually just some, fun adventure kind of things. And I said, yeah, sometimes. And sometimes I like things that are not necessarily always positive and uplifting, but they do challenge my thinking and challenge my way of seeing and so I put sometimes for that. And it occurred to me that I'm doing exactly what we are trying to learn how to do with working with our imagination, aren't we? Mm-hmm. Making a choice about the kinds of things that we're going to focus our vision on, our imagination on. I thought, wow, thank you, God. What a great little lesson for me great little example of, oh yeah, well, let's check, those kinds of movies that we want to keep seeing in our lives. And so, John Milton said, the mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell or a hell of heaven. And with that idea and that understanding, I want to share with you two stories in closing today. There was a salesman driving along on a lonely country road late one night. It was a rainy night, and he had a flat. And so he opened the trunk, and he looked inside, and there was no lug wrench. And so he looked around, and from the light, he could see a farmhouse off in the distance. And so it was a dimly dark road. It was pouring down rain, but he said, well, I'll go and check and see whether this farmer might have a lug wrench that I can borrow. And so as he walked along, surely the farmer would have one, As he walked along, he was getting soaked, and as he was getting more and more walking toward the house, he thought, oh boy, what am I? It's late at night. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning. Now this farmer, even if he has a lug wrench, he's going to be upset. He's going to be mad. I'm going to be waking this guy up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Surely, maybe he might not even answer the door. And well, even if he did, I know he's going to be angry. So as he's stumbling along, walking blindly, his shoes are soaked, his clothes are soaked, and by now, he's thinking, if the farmer does answer the door, he probably will shout something at me like, what the heck, what's the idea of waking me up at this hour? The thought made the salesman really mad. He said, well, what's this farmer doing? I need some help. Well, surely, what does he think he's doing, yelling at me this way? And after all, you know, I'm stranded here in the middle of nowhere and soaked to the skin. What a selfish clod this guy is. No doubt about it. I can't believe it. And finally he reaches and he just pounds on the door. And the farmer looks out and says, well, who is it? And he says, well, you know darn well who it is, yelled the salesman. It's me, and you can keep your blasted lug wrench. I wouldn't borrow it even if it was the last one on earth. Anybody resemble this remark? And then there's another story. This story is of two men who occupied an adjoining beds in a nursing home. And the man in the bed near the door was completely paralyzed and unable to move his head even a little bit. And so his roommate lay in the bed near the window. And although the aging process kept him confined in the bed, he remained both cheerful and he was alert. And the one who suffered paralysis asked his roommate if he would look out the window and let him know what's going on outside, what's going on in the world. And so day after day, this man by the window gave his friend a really complete and detailed report of what was going on, a vivid, detailed information of the postal man coming, of making his daily rounds, of wearing raincoats and boots when weather was rainy, or short sleeves and sunny days. And the paralyzed man really, in the bed, lived for those regular updates. He really just enjoyed having that view into the world. One day, however, his eyes that the world came to him through ended with the death of his friend. But before long, another man was assigned and moved into that room near the window. And after introducing themselves, the paralyzed man asked if his new roommate would be kind enough to tell him about what was going on outside the window. And the man said, sure. Only one thing, there's no window here. Our imaginations are an amazing gift. They're amazing gifts, and they're amazing tools. You and I have the choice of how we're going to use them. I hope you'll make the choice that lifts you up. I hope you'll make that choice that'll move you into experiencing and expressing even more of this wonderful, unique, divine nature that's every day trying to pour through you. And have fun with it. Have fun with it. Let's move into our meditation time. Let's just continue that breathing in of the peace and breathing out of release. And as you breathe in, begin to feel and see and know a love, a light, a joy, a peace. And see yourself not just experiencing that, but see yourself being an expression of that peace. In your mind's eye, begin to move into that place within you of stillness, of quiet. Imagine in your mind's eye that you are sitting on the edge of a beautiful crystal lake. And you see there your reflection in that lake. And perhaps you see reflections of the hills in the distance and trees along the shore. And see and feel the beauty of that. Feel the freshness. And now, in your mind's eye, gently lean over the edge of that beautiful, clear crystal lake and see your reflection. And smile at your image there and see it smiling back at you. Reflect on that image for a moment, and as you do see that image, see the appearance changing and become a beautiful, brilliant, radiant light And now see the image take form again of a very wise old sage who is looking at you with tenderness and love. And just relax into the experience of that flow of love and care and compassion and understanding. And in your heart, just talk to the sage about whatever is important in your life, especially about anything that might be troubling you or challenging you. Be aware of any conflicts or problems. And ask the sage in the lake about anything that's important to you. And listen. Listen moment for any understanding. And in that listening, hear and see those problems resolved. And envision that you've already taken the steps that will create this resolution. Imagine and see that sage, and all of a sudden there's a recognition, this is you after your problem has already been resolved. This is the part of you that already knows what steps you took. The part of you that already knows what to do and how to do it. It's that future you that's already overcome the difficulties, the challenges. See and listen and thank this sage within you for their presence, their guidance, their upliftment of heart, of spirit. And feel good about the fact that the sage is really you in your transcendent self. And know that this presence has always been available to you. Knowing that this divine flow of love is always in you, loving you, expressing through you, and is calling you forth into a greater expression of the wonderful possibilities in your life. Take a nice deep breath. Give thanks. Take another nice deep breath. Let a sense of peace and gratitude come into your heart, knowing that all is well. And take another nice deep breath, and gently let your awareness come back into this room, this time and place. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes.